What's up everyone, and today we're going to create this custom widget that follows your camera rotation and your camera height. And in addition to this, we're going to create custom pointers that will activate when you hover on the menu, like this. So if you do not hit your menu, pointers will disappear, but once you're in your menu, pointers will appear. And also, once you click on the button, you will get to another widget, and when clicking back, you're going back to your main menu. Also, we'll do Options tab, and here we'll have some settings, and also we can click Back button and get back to our main menu. And once we click Quit, we're going to quit our game. And today I want to make special shout out to Noel, who supported my channel. And just for everyone watching, I just want to let you know that all of those money are spent on educational and learning purposes only. So any cent you donate is going to be spent on me acquiring new skills and sharing it with you. Okay, so with no further ado, let's go ahead and implement our widget. Okay, so I just created a new VR template, so everything you see here is unmodified and completely clear. Before we jump into creating widgets, I just want to explain to everyone how it is working. So we're going to have 3 widgets that we're going to switch between. The first one is our main menu. That's basically when we have play, options, and quit buttons. Then we have our options and we have our levels. Also, we need some kind of container to store all of those 3 widgets and switch between them. That's where our widget master comes in. It will have a widget switcher that will actually switch between the widget. And afterwards, since we cannot place our widget inside the level itself, we're going to create a nectar with that widget. So now, once you understood the logic, let's go ahead and create the 3 widgets we were talking about. So I will go ahead to my content folder, I will right click, I will create a new folder, and let's call it widgets. First thing we're going to do in this folder is to right click, user interface, widget blueprint. And here you can just go ahead and click on user widget, like this. Now let's call it WB main menu. So let's double click on main menu. And here you will see an empty space. That's basically where we'll build our widgets. So first thing we'll have to do is to add our canvas panel. That's where our all elements will be located. Let's go ahead in our search palette and write canvas. So as you'll see here, you'll have a canvas panel. Go ahead and drag it into here. So if you click this icon right here, you will see the resolution of your canvas panel. We're working in our VR, so we can go ahead and leave it as it is, 1280 by 720. So first thing we have to create is our gray background. So let's go ahead and search another item in our palette, and it will be called image. Yes, for our background, we're going to be using image, but we're just going to paint it in some kind of color. So let's go ahead, drag it inside here, and on your right panel, as you can see here, we have different settings. So the first thing we're going to look into is our size X and size Y. That's basically the resolution of your square right here. So let's go ahead, and for our convenience, we're going to set our size X to 1100 and our size Y to 900. What we can notice here is that our image is not centered, so we need to center it. That's where our anchor points come in. So if you click right here, you will see a layout of different anchor points. So anchor point is basically a reference point using which we can align our items in our canvas. So let's go ahead, and since we want to center our block in the middle of our canvas, let's go ahead and select this item right here. It will actually put our anchor in the center of our canvas panel. Afterwards, you will see position X and position Y. That's how much our rectangle is shifted from our anchor. So if you try to adjust this value, you will see that it changes. So let's go ahead and put it to 0 and 0. So now, our top left corner of our rectangle is exactly on our anchor point, but we want it to be centered. That's also where our alignment comes in. The fastest one is to put 0.5 here, and you will see that our box will shift 0.5 multiplied by size Y. So it will shift 450 units to the top. And also, we can have this parameter right here. Let's go ahead and put 0.5 here too. So now, this rectangle is shifted right in the center. And another way to explain what just happened here, and is going to be the second way of our positioning, is that we're going to divide our size X and size Y by 2. So if we change our position X, you can see that our rectangle moves. So let's go ahead and divide our size X by 2. So 1100 divided by 2 is 550. Let's go ahead and write 550 into our position X. So this 550, if we put it right here, 550, it will move our rectangle to the right, but we need to move it backwards. So we need to write here minus 550. And now, as you can see, it will be also centered in its X axis. And let's go ahead and do the same with Y. So with Y, our rectangle now has to go up. So position Y will be also negative. And since our size Y is 900, half of that will be 450, minus 450. And as you can see, that was the second way to center our position. So to conclude everything, our alignment does our position X and position Y much faster. So you can go ahead, put 0, 0 here, and put 0.5 here. 0.5 multiplies our size Y by 0.5, it meaning that it's going to be our 450, and move it towards our anchor point. That's the fastest way of positioning your item. Okay, so once we understand how to position an item, it's time to stylize it. So first thing you can notice in here is that we have our appearance tab. And in appearance tab, we can have our brush. So let's go ahead and extend this. And here we have our tint. That's the parameter that is responsible for our background color. So let's go ahead and click here. So once you change color on this color circle, the color will be changed here. So let's go ahead and put some darker color. So that's the color I've chosen, and hit OK. And also make sure you hit compile. So now let's go ahead and do our rounded corners. I don't like sharp corners, so let's go ahead. As you can see here, there is a parameter called draw as. So as you click here, you'll see a bunch of parameters. So to make our rounded box, we have to choose rounded box. But as you can see now, it is too rounded. So what we can do is to open our outline settings right here. Let's go ahead and change our rounding type. What we'll have to do is to change it to fixed radius, like this. But now, nothing has changed. To fix it, we're going to increase our corner radius right here. Let's go ahead and start with value 20. And as you can see, there is a slight corner radius right here. But we want to see the corner radius more bigger, so let's go ahead and set it to 100. Like this, we have something that looks more beautiful. Okay, so now it's time to add our heading. And let's go ahead and look for our text in our palette and drag the text element right here. You can go ahead and extend it like this, and you can notice that our text is not aligned properly. So to align it to the center, we have our justification rule right here, and make sure you click align text center, like this. And afterwards, let's actually round our box size X and size Y just to make it look more beautiful. So for instance, to 600 by 200. And now let's replace our text by, for instance, my game. Because I don't have a game, maybe you have your own name, be free to change it for your own game. And afterwards, let's go ahead and increase the size. To increase our size, we'll have to open our font tab right here. And you will see size parameter. You can play with the size, but I'll just leave it as this one. And now our text is also not centered. So let's go ahead to our anchors and choose the centered anchor, like this. So what I would suggest you doing, and I do it all the time, position X, position Y, we set to 0, and alignment for our X, we choose to 0.5, like this. And now we want to move our text to the top. So to do this, make sure you hold your shift key and drag your text to the top, like this. And here, our text is centered in our panel. Now it's time to do some buttons. Let's go ahead to our search palette and search for a button. And you will see here a button. Let's drag it into our panel. Now let's go ahead and center it, the same way as I've shown before. And we can also set custom size. So what I found works good is 640 by 100. Like this. And let's go ahead and center this button. After we are done, let's move it a little bit to the top, holding the shift key. And now let's work on our button. So first of all, we can open our style menu. And here, let's go ahead and look for our normal. So normal is our regular color of the button. It's our idle state. So let's go ahead and make it purple. Like this. And hit OK. And now as you can see, we have also a hovered option. So hovered option happens when you hover over the button. Let's go ahead and open it and change the color, our tint, to the same color. We can take this eyedropper and click on the same color we have right here to get the same color. And let's make it a little bit brighter. So now once we hover on our button, it will be highlighted by a lighter color with the same tint. And afterwards, let's go ahead and make a corner radius. So for this, you have to look for your normal style. And here, we'll go and extend our outline settings. Make sure your draw as and rounding types are set to rounded box and fixed radius respectively. So then let's go ahead and increase our corner radius. I prefer a value 30. And also let's go ahead and make our width to 8. It's our border width. And for the color, I prefer to set it to a little bit darker than we have right here. So let's go ahead, open the color palette, take the eyedropper, put it here, and make the tint a little bit darker, like this. Okay, so the next thing we want to do, we want to display a text in our button. So let's go ahead, search for text, and put it inside our button as a child, like this. And as you can see here, our text will be centered automatically. Let's go ahead and change the text to play. And we can increase its size. Like this. Afterwards, we need 3 more buttons for our options and for our quit option. So let's go ahead, press on our button and press Ctrl D on your keyboard. And as you will see, your button will be copied. Then to center it again, go ahead to your position X. It will change once you duplicate your button and set it to 0. Like this. and we'll have another button. All we have to do now is to change our text. So let's go ahead and say settings. And then here, let's change the color of this button to pretty much like orange, like this. And hit OK. So now we can stylize your button. You can do whatever you want. I'm going to use my eyedropper, click on here, and make the tint a little bit darker, like this. And also I'm going to change our hovered, also choosing my eyedropper, pressing on a button, and making tint a little bit darker. And then duplicate your button again. Use the same value 0 for position X, and holding your shift button, drag it down. So now you want to have this position here and this position here to be the same. So to center out those buttons right now, what we can do to make less mess, what we can do is actually go ahead and center this button to this reference point. Let's go ahead and click on this button and put 0.5 for our alignment Y, like this, and it will be centered. So now let's choose an optimal height between those two buttons, like this, and let's round this value to -200. So now, once we've decided between this distance right here, we should notice that the distance from this reference point to this button is -200. But since we're considering our size of the button also as a distance, it's 100. We need to subtract 100 from 200, getting us 100 a distance from here to our reference point. Therefore, our distance from reference point to this button should be also 100. So let's go ahead and change our position Y for this button to 100, like this. And now, as you can see, the distance is same. All we have left is actually to change the appearance of this button. So let's go ahead and make it a little bit darker. So tint, I will choose close to black, like this. I will change its outline to also dark, but a little bit lighter, like this. So on hovered, I will choose also dark, but a little bit lighter, like this. You can play with the colors, do everything you like. Now all we have to do is just rename this button right here. So let's go ahead and rename it, quit. Okay. We are done with our appearance. Now let's go ahead and change our variables. As you can see on your bottom left corner, there are our variables in our hierarchical tree. So let's go ahead and choose our first button. We can see that this button is called button 0. To make it distinguishable, let's go ahead and rename it to btn play. Our settings button, we're going to rename to button settings, btn settings, like this. And our quit button, we're going to rename to btn quit. Also, what I've noticed here is that when we hover, our border is rectangular, but we need to send it to rounded box. So let's go ahead to our hovered, and we need to draw as rounded box, outline setting. Here, we need to set the same values as our corner radius here in our normal style. So shift, right click here, shift, left click here. And make sure you do it for all the buttons. Like this, hit Ctrl S and save. So now we have to program those buttons. As you can see on your top right corner, there's a designer tab and graph tab. So designer is basically for design and graph is for our coding, for our behavior of buttons. So let's go ahead and click on our graph. And as you can see, we don't have anything here, but we can see our variables, button play, button quit, button settings. Click on our button play. And as we can see here, we have some events. On clicked, on pressed. We are interested about on clicked. So click on our button play, select on clicked event, like this. And do the same for the rest of the buttons. When we click on our buttons, we want to have some action. So the first one and easiest to implement is our button quit. So once we clicked on this button, we want to quit game. That's simple, like this. When we click on our button settings, we want to change our widget to a different one. So let's go ahead and create an event dispatcher. That's how we're going to communicate with our master widget to switch the widget. So event dispatcher is basically a communication tool between different actors. So let's go ahead and create our event. And our event will be clicked on settings. And for our unclicked button play, we're going to create another event dispatcher and call it clicked on play. And now, when we click on play, we want to call this event. We want to make our master know that we have clicked on our play button. And the same with our settings. We're going to drag it right here and press on call, like this. And that's everything we have to do with this widget. So click compile and save. And make sure everything here satisfies you. Once we're done with this one, we can close our widget. And we're going to create another one. So to make things a little bit quicker, let's actually go ahead and duplicate our existing one. So click on this one time, press Ctrl D, you will duplicate everything you have here, and let's rename it to WB level selector, like this. Let's double click on it, and as you can see, everything here is preserved. So to make our level selector, let's go ahead and increase the size of our main image right here. And what I find works good is actually to set our size X to 1850. Like this. But the only button we'll need here is only back button. So what I would suggest you doing is to delete the first two and drag our quit button, holding the shift button to the bottom, like this. And let's rename our quit button to back. Like this. And to create your own levels, what I had in the preview, we can go ahead and add 3 buttons. So look for button, drag it right here, and let's go ahead and make it 400 by 400. And to center our elements, we can go ahead and put our anchor point to the center, like this. Set our position X to 0, position Y to 0, and have value 0.5 here and 0.5 here. And our button is centered. So just for the sake of the speed, the only thing I'm going to do with my appearance is to change the hovered setting. So I'm going to set it to a little bit darker color. And afterwards, I'm going to make 2 more buttons right here. So Control D, we duplicated the button. We changed our position X to 0, position Y to 0. Now they're one on each other. So let's go ahead and drag it to the right, holding Shift key. Make the desired difference between your 2 buttons. So this value you can set to 500. Just make sure you round your value. Then click on the centered button, press Ctrl D again, make sure you have zeros here, and drag it now to this way. As you can see, this button is 500 units to the right, meaning that this button will be minus 500 units to the left. Like this. Okay, so now we are done with this menu. All we have to do is to rename our variables. So let's go ahead and rename our button 1. It's going to be button 1, then button 2, we're going to rename for button 2, and finally our button 3, we're going to rename for our button 3. All we have left now is to rename our back button, because we have button quit, but just for the sake of understanding what is this button, we're going to rename it to button back. Like this. And remember to paste our corner radius from outline settings here to corner radius from outline settings on the hovered here. We're going to hit compile and save. As you can see here, we have some errors. Don't be afraid of them. That's because we haven't replaced the variables in our graph. So let's go ahead and delete everything we have here, hit compile and save, and add unclicked events to those buttons we have just renamed. So here, if you have your button 1, button 2, button 3, so if you want to actually have levels here, you can use the command called open level by name. And if you have a name of your level, you put it right here. The same with all of those 3 buttons right here. Here will be level 1, level 2, and level 3 here. And once we switch to our level, we no longer want to see our menu because we have chosen the level, right? So let's go ahead and now work with our events. So what we're going to do, we're going still to have 2 events. Let's go ahead and rename the available ones. So the first one, I'm going to call delete widget. That happens when we choose our level. So let's go ahead and call it here, like this. So if you press on any of the levels, you will go to this level and close the widget. But just for the sake of experiment, I'm not going to create any levels, I'm going to delete this, but if you have your levels, don't delete it, but I'm going to. And on our button back, we're going to rename an event and we'll call it back button pressed. And we'll call it when we click our back button. Right here. Click compile and save. That's all we have to do with this widget. We can close it now. Now let's go ahead and create our settings widget. That's for this button right here. What we can do to save our time, just duplicate WB level selector and call it WB settings. Go ahead and click on the settings. And now we have to delete those 3 buttons. We no longer need them. And let's just add a simple square here, like some color. So let's go ahead and drag the image into here. And as you have noticed, you do not see the image here. That's because our Z order, it means that our image is under our image 0. So it's underneath this panel. So what we'll have to do is to actually change our Z order here to 1. It means that image will be on our panel. And now let's go ahead and center it. So we choose our anchor to the center. We choose zeros here and 0.5 for X and for Y. Now this one is centered. And let's rename this text so we can go ahead and call it settings like this. And what we can do, we can change our size X from 1850 to 1100 like this. And make sure that your hovered here also has the same corner radius. So shift right click and here shift left click like this. Hit compile and save. Now as you will see, you'll also have errors. That's because we no longer have those button 1, button 2, button 3. So let's go ahead and delete them. And here we can delete our event dispatcher delete widget. And let's actually rename our widget back button pressed like this. Hit compile and save. So now, as I recently told you, we need to create a special container that will switch between those widgets. So let's go ahead and create another widget. Right click, user interface, widget blueprint, user widget, and let's call it WB MasterWidget. So let's go ahead, double click on this widget, and here we'll also have to add our canvas. Drag it into here, We can leave the size as it is. Now we'll have to add a border. So that will be basically the spot our widget switcher will be spawned. So let's go ahead and drag the border here also. Let's position it in the center. 0, 0, 0.5, 0.5. And make our content alignment to vertical alignment centered and horizontal alignment centered. And leave it as it is. Afterwards, we're going to add a special component called WidgetSwitcher. So this is our widget switcher that switches between the widgets. And let's go ahead and make it a child of our border. Like this. So as you can see now, the point is centered right here. Now all we need to do is to add those widgets we have created. So let's go ahead and type WB in our search panel. And here you'll see our 3 widgets. So let's go ahead and drag our level selector, our main menu, and our WB settings. And as you can see, they will appear right here. They are all here. So the way our widget switcher works is that it has a variable called active widget index. So basically, if you change it to 0, it means it will access the 0th element right here, WB level selector. If you change it to 1, it will select the next widget, WB main menu. So let's go ahead and just for our convenience, rearrange those items right here. So main menu was on the first place, settings on the second, and level selector in the third. And default value of widget switcher set to 0. Hit compile and save. So now we have to actually set up our widget switching. So once we hit on our play, we'll go to our level selector. Once we click on our settings, we'll go to our settings. So let's go ahead to our graph. And as you can see here, we have our event construct, event tick, and event pre-construct. We'll be interested in our event construct. So now, as you can see here, we have our widgets on our left panel. So let's go ahead and drag our main menu first to here. As you remember, our main menu, let me actually open it, has 2 event dispatchers. Clicked on settings and clicked on play. So what we'll have to do here is to assign on those events. So let's go ahead and drag it from WB main menu, assign on, and as you can see, assign on play and on settings will appear here. Let's go ahead and start with play and connect it to event pre-construct. So now we need to decide what will happen. Everything that is happening after this execution pin happens when we click on our play button. So as we click on our play button, we want to switch to our level selector. It means that our widget switcher index here must become 2. So let's go ahead and set it. So we go ahead, access our widget switcher, set active widget index to 2, and connect it to this event right here. Afterwards, we have another event from our main menu, and this event is clicked on settings. So the same way, we're going to assign on settings, like this. And now, our settings panel is active index widget 1. It's this one. So let's go back ahead to our graph and copy this code right here. And our index now will be 1. So now, if we look on our level selector and our settings, we'll see we have 1 button back. And we also created an event dispatcher for those buttons. So now we have to assign the same events in our back button for our settings and level selector. Let's get them here. The same way, assign back button pressed. And here, since we want to go back to our main menu, so we are going to this main menu, and as we know, active widget index here is 0. So we copy this piece of code, paste it here, and set active widget index to 0. And afterwards, we need to do the same for our level selector. So grab it here, assign back button pressed. And since those 2 back button pressed have same result, we can actually drag it here and connect it to this pin, like this. Afterwards, let's hit compile and save. So after we have our master widget, if you try to drag it into the level, you will not be able to place it. So what we'll have to do is to create an actor that will hold this widget. So let's go ahead and create an actor. And let's call it BP UMGDisplay. We can double click on this actor, and all we have to do here is to add a widget component. That's a component that holds a widget. After you've added the widget, you have to look for a class. So let's go ahead in details panel and look for a class. And here we set our widget class. Let's set it to WB MasterWidget. And it's going to be huge. So as you can see now, it looks kind of weird. That's because our draw size is 500 by 500. What you should do is to change it to 1920 by 1080. Like this. And now you will see the whole widget. That's because our draw size before was limiting the way the widget works. So let's go ahead now, scale it down a little bit. Maybe we can scale it down to 0.06. And just because of the fact that we want to spawn the widget right in front of us, let's go ahead and turn it to the player. 180 degrees to here, because if you add an arrow component, so we are facing this way, and we'll have to rotate the widget 180 degrees, because our arrow means the way we are facing. So our head will be here, means that we'll have to move our widget a little bit forward, and let's actually move it 80 units forward, like that. So now, if you put your widget into the level, you will actually see it. But we want to spawn our widget when our player spawns. So that would be unreasonable to spawn it before the player spawns. So let's go to our VRPawn, and now, since we want to spawn our widget after our player spawns, it means that we should do it on event begin play. So event begin play is responsible for when our pawn spawns, these actions will be done. So let's go ahead to the end, and here we want to spawn actor from class, and our class is going to be BP UMGDisplay. And now we have to tell our actor where we want it to be spawned. So let's go ahead, right click on spawn transform and split our structure pin. We're going to get our get player camera manager. That's basically where our camera is on our world, and we're going to get its root component. Like this. You can say, I can get the camera right away. Yes, you can get the camera right away, but I'm teaching you the things you might use everywhere. If you're going ahead with this way, you can access your player's camera from any blueprint you have. So imagine I'm somewhere in another blueprint. I can go ahead and do the same, and if I hit compile, it will be compiled. We'll still access our VRPawn's camera. So using those two nodes, you will access your camera anywhere you want in your game without a need to have a reference for your VRPawn. So now we're getting our root components, get world location, and we're getting the rotation, get world rotation, and connected to location and rotation. And here choose always spawn, ignore collisions, like this. So if we jump into the game right now, we'll see that our menu actually spawns in the way we look. But the only problem is that it spawns on the ground. But wait, we set our rotation and location to where our camera is. It means that it was supposed to spawn right there. The reason for this is that we're spawning our UMGDisplay that fast that our tracking origin does not have enough time to even work. And let's add a delay node for 0.3 seconds, for instance. We're doing this to let our tracking origin to actually replicate our real world height. So now, if you jump into the game, you will see that the menu spawns right in front of you here. So now, once our camera component has enough time to track our real world height, it lets our menu spawn right here instead of spawning right there. So once we have set up this issue, let's actually set up our custom pointers. So first of all, let's go to our UMG display. We need to add some additional functionality on our event begin play. So once our UMG spawns, we want to allow our VRPawn to interact with it and therefore have additional input actions. So let's go ahead. On our event begin play, we're going to get player pawn, which will allow us to get our pawn, meaning our VRPawn, and we're going to cast to VRPawn, just to be able to reference its variables. And afterwards, we're going to promote it to a variable, just in case we need it. Let's call it VRPawn, like this. And afterwards, we're going to set actor tick enabled. So what does it mean is that in our VRPawn, we can see that our start was tick enabled is disabled, and make sure it is, because if it's enabled on your side, make sure you turn it off. So why we need it disabled? Because we don't want to overload our system with tick enabled from event begin play, but once our UMG spawns, we need to control where our custom pointer is every frame. Therefore, we set tick enabled in our UMG display explicitly right here. And our target, make sure it's going to be our VRPawn, like this, and make sure it's enabled. Afterwards, we need to add our input mapping context to allow our VRPawn click on the buttons. So here we get player controller, like this. We're going to enable input and make sure you connect it to player controller right here, because otherwise it will not work. You access enhanced input local subsystem. You're going to add mapping context. And here we're adding our default mapping context that is here in our VR template. It's called IMC menu, and make sure your priority here is set to 1. Otherwise it will not work. Afterwards, we're going to use the actions. We're going to override them. So IA menu interaction left and IA menu interaction right. Those two events. So now in our VRPawn, we have our motion controllers. So widget interaction left and widget interaction right. So first thing we should make sure we have here is our trace channel is set to 3D widget. We're going to work with our widgets, that's why we set it. And also, just for the sake of testing, go ahead and enable show debug. make sure it's set to true. And in order for us to click on the button, we need to imitate our mouse click. So those widget interactions right and left are responsible for our tracking and clicking. So go ahead back to UMGDisplay, and as you remember, we have variable VRPawn here. We're going to access it. Get widget interaction right, like this. And we're going to get widget interaction left, like this. And we're going to play, and we're going to press pointer key, and we're imitating our left mouse press button, this one. And we're going to do it on started. And once we release it, meaning cancelled or completed, we're going to release pointer key, and it's going to be the same left mouse button. And we connect it to cancelled or completed. We can go ahead, copy those values and paste them here, the same we're doing for our widget interaction right. Okay, and last step, I'm repeating again, make sure that the trace channel here is 3D widget. We're going to our UMGDisplay in our widget, and we go back to its collision settings. And make sure that you have custom preset here, and your 3D widget is blocking the trace response. And also here, if you remember, we had our level selector, and in level selector, we have our code delete widget. So go ahead in our BP UMGDisplay, we're going to get our widget, we're going to cast it to WB MasterWidget, and from our MasterWidget, we're going to get WB level selector, and we're going to assign on delete widget, like this. And what we're going to do here is to delete actor, like this, destroy actor. And on target itself, it means that it will destroy itself. So if we jump now to the game, and we'll try to see how everything works, you will see we have 2 pointers right now, and those are default ones. No worries, we'll replace them. You can click on play. First, let's go and try to go back. We can go back. Also with the settings, we can go to our settings, and also we can go back. So if we press play and we press on our level, our widget will be destroyed. And also if we press quit, we're going to quit our game. That's simple. Okay, so now let's go ahead and implement our pointers. So the way we're going to do them is that we're going to have our spline and our spline mesh, and that will be representing our custom pointer. So let's go and start with our widget right. Locate your motion controller right aim here, and we're going to add our spline. And at the same time, let's go ahead and rename it spline right, and we're going to add our spline mesh. And here, once you've added spline mesh, make sure you set the mobility to movable. Otherwise, your mesh will not move. And afterwards, you can set your spline mesh the child of motion controller right aim, like this. So you can go ahead now and choose your static mesh for your spline. I'm going to set translation handle, this one. And you can hit compile. So here I'm choosing this mesh just as default value. You can go ahead and choose your own mesh and test the meshes. Maybe you want to apply a different material here, so it's up to you. And that's the setup for our motion controller right aim. So now we have to create our event tech node. So now our part is to being able to interact with our menu once the menu spawns. Therefore, in our UMGDisplay, I will just emphasize this again, we're setting actor tick enabled of our VRPawn. Means this node is going to be triggered every tick. Meaning that this node event tick will be triggered after our UMG menu spawns right here, and it will be triggered every frame. So let's go ahead and create a sequence node. So we'll have 1 row for our left hand and 1 row for our right hand. So let's go ahead and make our right hand. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a function that will be responsible for collapsing our spline and extending our spline to the point where we hit our widget with our widget interaction right. So let's go ahead and create a function, and we can call it update spline mesh. And for the inputs of this function, since we're going to use this for both of our hands, we're going to have 2 inputs. The first input will be our spline, and it will be of type spline component, like this. And other input, we're going to have our spline mesh, and its type is spline mesh component. Hit compile and save. So what this function is responsible for is just the setting our spline point 0 as spline point 1. So if you go to your viewport, you'll see that your spline has its 0th point and it has its first point. So if you click here, you can select through the points, and input key, as you can see here, changes. So input key 0 is our first spline point, and our input key 1 is our second spline point right here. So what you want to do is just to set the 0 spline point to where it is right now, and second spline point's location, we want to set where our widget interaction right debug ray, you remember this right one, intersects with our widget. So back to our function, we're going to get location and tangent at a spline point. like this, and we're going to duplicate it. So we're managing in our local space, and make sure here is your index point 1, so that this one is responsible for 0th point and this one for the 1st point. And now all we have to do is just to connect spline here, and spline mesh we're going to set start and end. So started position here and start tangent will be our point index 0s, so connect it right here. And our end position is this one. That's for overlaying our spline with our spline mesh. So now we have to create another function that will collapse our spline, because when we are not hitting our widget, we don't want the spline to be displayed at all, so we need to collapse it. Let's go ahead, click on our update spline mesh, Control D, we're going to duplicate function, and let's call it collapse spline. And in this function, let's go ahead and delete all the nodes we have. So what we are going to do, we're going to drag from spline and get location at spline point. Make sure that point index is 0 and your coordinate space is world. And afterwards, we set location at spline point, and our target, make sure you connect spline to your target. And execution pin 2. And also point index here should be 1, and our coordinate space should be also world. So what it essentially does is that it has its spline right here, and it sets the location of the first point right here to the 0th point, meaning that this spline collapses. And after we collapse our spline, we also have to collapse our mesh. Therefore, let's go ahead and update our spline mesh too. Connect the spline to here and mesh to here. Hit compile and save. So going back to event tick, let's go ahead and implement our logic for our widget interaction right. So go ahead, drag your widget interaction right, get last hit result. That will give us the hit result with our widget. Then we break our hit result, and we are checking if we have a blocking hit, meaning that we intersect something, like this. So in case we are not hitting anything, we need to collapse our spline. So let's go ahead, drag our collapse spline function here, and our spline and spline mesh here will be our spline right and spline mesh. And go ahead and also rename it to spline mesh right, like this. In case we hit, we need to get our spline right and set location at spline point. Make sure your coordinate space is also set to world, and your point index is going to be 1. So now, once we hit something, we need to set our first index on our spline to the hit result. And our location will be our location for our break hit result. Connect it right here. And you can collapse it back. Connect this one to here. And after we set this point in our spline, we also need to update our spline mesh. So let's go ahead and drag our update spline mesh function right here. You can copy those values here and put them right here. Spline right to spline mesh right to spline mesh. Completely the same we're doing for our left hand. So let's go ahead, copy those two values right here and paste it to our motion controller left aim right here. And make sure they are children of motion controller left aim, like this. And let's rename them spline left, spline mesh left, like this. Now we can go ahead and copy all of those functions we have here, paste them on top like this, and connect sequence 0 to this branch. Instead of widget interaction right, we're going to get our widget interaction left, like this. Then instead of our spline right and spline mesh right, we're using our spline left and spline mesh left. Like this. Instead of our spline right, we're using our spline left. Instead of those variables, we can go ahead and copy those variables here. Okay, let's hit compile and save. And just to test it all out, let's go ahead to our widget interaction left and widget interaction right and disable our show debug, because we no longer need it since we have our custom mesh. So let's jump to the game and see if everything works perfectly and smoothly as we need. Now, as you can see, we have our custom pointers, and if we're not hitting our menu, they disappear, but once we are on our menu, they appear. And also, you can click on the buttons, and as you can see, everything works. And okay, finally, the last step to do, I know the tutorial has been for a long time, is to actually implement our rotate main menu function to our widget, so it actually rotated and followed the direction of our camera. So let's go back to our UMGWidget. We're going to our event graph, and we're going to work on our event tick function. Since this widget is spawned, we want to rotate it every frame. So let's go ahead and create a function. We're going to call it rotate main menu. And as input of this function, we'll have our float value. That's basically going to be our delta time. So delta time is going to be our float. What we're doing here, we're getting its default scene root. We're getting world location and rotation. Like this. Afterwards, as you remember, I've explained to you about get player camera manager. That's how we can get our VRPawn's camera without having a reference to our VRPawn. Get transform component. Our camera has a transform component. And from here, we are also getting our world location and world rotation. like this. Afterwards, we need to interpolate our position. So let's go ahead and use vinterp2. And our tangent here is going to be our transform component get world location. Delta time is going to be our delta time from here. And interp speed, what I found works the best is 0.6. And the same way we are doing with our rotation, our interp2. And our target is going to be this value from here. Delta time is same. And interp speed will be 0.8. Then we set actor transform. We split the structure pin, and here we connect our location to location, and we split the structure pin of our rotator, and here we do the same and connect just the Z value right here, and hit compile and save. Go back to your event graph and put our rotate menu function to event tick. And now, if we hit compile and save, jump to our game, we'll see that our menu actually follows our rotation. And once we go back, menu also goes back. So there is no way you're gonna miss this menu. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope it helped you to develop your game, and I hope you're satisfied with what we have learned today, and I wish you a good day.